The house on Callaway Road was never quiet in the way a house should be quiet. The kind that settles around you like a shawl, soft and familiar. This quiet was the other kind. The kind that watches you. Meredith had learned the difference in her first winter there. She had been 23 years old and newly married, and she had stood at the kitchen window every morning watching the frost form on the glass, thinking, this is my life now. Not with grief, not with joy. With the flat, careful acknowledgement of a woman who has been told what her life will be, and has chosen to believe the telling. Her husband's name was Dorian Ashby. He was 31 when they married, established in his practice, respected in the county, and possessed of a quality that Meredith's mother had called steadiness, and that Meredith, 4 years later, had come to recognize as indifference. He was steady, the way a stone wall is steady. Reliable. Unmoved. The marriage had been her father's arrangement. Not cruel. Her father was not a cruel man. But practical in the way that men of his generation understood practicality. The Holloways had a name and a house, and very little money left to keep either. The Ashbys had money and a physician's respectability and no particular interest in romance. The contract was sensible. Everyone said so. Meredith had met Dorian 3 times before the wedding. He was polite. He asked about her reading once. She told him she liked history, and he nodded the way men nod when they have already stopped listening. And she filed that away like a letter. She knew she would have to return to someday. She had not returned to it until the night she stood in the upstairs hallway, her hand flat against the wall, listening to her husband laugh. It was a Saturday in October 1831. The county had turned amber and rust outside every window, and the parlor downstairs was full of men. 3 of Dorian's colleagues from the medical society. Men who came every few months to drink his bourbon, and fill the house with the particular noise of men who believed themselves to be very important. Meredith had served them herself. The good china, the cold cuts, the apple cake she had spent the afternoon preparing. She had smiled at each of them. She had refilled their glasses, and then she had excused herself, because that was what was expected, and gone upstairs to give them the room they wanted. She had not meant to hear. She had come back down for a forgotten candle. The nights were getting dark earlier, and she had left a taper on the sideboard, and she had paused at the bottom of the stairs when she heard her name. Not spoken tenderly, not even spoken ordinarily. Spoken the way a man speaks a word he finds slightly embarrassing. Meredith means well, Dorian was saying. His voice was the carefully modulated voice of a man who considers himself above the company he keeps and slightly below it at the same time. She is very earnest. It's rather like having a spaniel. Devoted, well-intentioned, and completely unaware that no one requires quite so much devotion. There was laughter, male laughter, easy and comfortable. The laughter of men who have never once considered that the subject of their amusement might be standing 3 feet away on the other side of a wall. She tries very hard, said one of them. Meredith thought it was Dr. Pruitt, from the accent. I'm sure that counts for something. I'm sure it does, Dorian said, and laughed again. Meredith stood in the hallway for a long time after that. Long enough that the candle she had come for was no longer worth retrieving. Long enough that the cold from the floorboards moved through the soles of her slippers and into her bones. She had known, in some part of herself, that Dorian did not love her. She had known that the way you know a door in your house does not quite hang straight. You see it every day, you account for it, you never quite fix it, and you stop expecting it to be different. But knowing that your husband does not love you is one thing. Hearing him describe you as an affectionate and unnecessary animal, to men who will see you at church on Sunday, and look at you with that knowledge behind their eyes. That is something else entirely. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed they shared, and looked at her hands in her lap. Her wedding ring was a thin gold band, plain, chosen by Dorian's mother. It had never quite fit, slightly too large, always in danger of sliding. She had been careful with it for 4 years. Taken it off each night, placed it on the nightstand, put it back each morning like a duty performed. She took it off now. She set it on the nightstand. She did not put it back. She did not leave that night. She would like to say she did, that the decision came like lightning, swift and certain. But the truth was more ordinary than that. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the men downstairs until they left, listened to Dorian's footsteps on the stairs, listened to him enter the room and undress in the dark without speaking to her, which was normal, and fall asleep without speaking to her, which was also normal. She lay beside him and thought. She thought about the 14 she had saved in the drawer of her writing desk. Money from the household accounts, set aside carefully over 18 months, not stolen but retained, the small private economy of a woman who had learned, without being able to name the lesson, that she might someday need resources that were hers and hers alone. She thought about her mother's sister, Aunt Polly, who lived 40 miles north in a town called Harwick, and who had written to Meredith twice a year every year of her marriage. Letters full of warmth and herb garden news, and the kind of uncomplicated affection that had always made Meredith feel, reading them, like she was pressing her face against a warm window from the outside. She thought about what she would do tomorrow, and the day after, and the 30 or 40 years of days after that, and she found that when she tried to picture them, there was nothing there. Just the Ashby house on Callaway Road and its particular silence and Dorian's footsteps moving away. She did not sleep. By 4 in the morning she had made her decision. She was quiet about it in the way she had always been quiet, which was to say, completely. She had learned early in the marriage that Dorian slept heavily and woke irritably, and that the two qualities together made the pre-dawn hours entirely her own. She dressed in the dark. Her gray wool traveling dress, her boots, the good ones, resoled last spring, her warmest coat. She took the money from the desk drawer and counted it twice. $14.30. She took the small portrait of her mother from the mantelpiece. She took the letter she had already written, 2 days earlier, as if some part of her had known she was going to need it, and left it on the kitchen table where Mrs. Dowd would find it in the morning. The letter was addressed to no one in particular. It said, "I have gone to stay with my aunt. I am well. Please do not come after me." She did not say goodbye to the house. She had never loved it. The road north was empty and dark and cold in the way that October mornings are cold. Not brutal yet, but carrying the promise of brutality the way a quiet man carries the promise of what he will eventually say. Meredith walked quickly. She had always been a capable walker, something Dorian had once remarked on, with what she had interpreted as approval, and later understood was simply surprise that a woman could cover ground efficiently. She had been walking perhaps an hour when she heard the wagon. She stopped, pulled to the side of the road. It was still dark enough that she could not see well, and her first instinct, the instinct of a woman alone on a road before dawn, was caution. But the wagon slowed, and the man driving it called out in a voice that was matter-of-fact rather than threatening. "You all right, ma'am?" His name, she learned later, was Sterling Webb. He was a farmer, 50-something, on his way to market in Harwick, with 2 crates of late apples and no particular conversation in mind. He did not ask why she was walking alone on a county road at 5 in the morning. He simply shifted the apple crates to make room on the bench and said, "I go through Harwick. You're welcome to ride." She accepted. They did not talk much. The sky went from black to gray to the particular tender pink of an early autumn sunrise, and Meredith sat beside this stranger on his wagon bench and felt, for the first time in 4 years, that the air she was breathing was simply air. Not Dorian's air, not the Ashby house's air, just weather, moving through her lungs like it belonged there. "You got family in Harwick?" Sterling asked at one point. "My aunt," she said. He nodded. That was enough. Polly Drummond was 56 years old, and had been a widow for 11 years, and had opinions about everything, which she expressed without apology and without malice in equal measure. She was not surprised to see Meredith on her doorstep at 7:30 in the morning. She was not even particularly surprised to see her with a traveling bag and no husband. "Come in," she said, and stood back from the door. "I'll put water on." At the kitchen table, with a cup of tea between her hands and the October light coming through Polly's good clean windows, Meredith told her everything. She did not dramatize it. She told it plainly, the way she had always done things. The 4 years, the quiet, the particular texture of being married to someone who treated you as furniture, and the parlor, and the laugh, and the words. Devoted, well-intentioned, and completely unaware that no one requires quite so much devotion. Polly listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Meredith was finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother left you land, you know." Meredith looked up. "What?" 36 acres, out past the mill. Your mother's mother. She left it in trust for you. I don't suppose your father ever mentioned it." Polly's tone was even, but her eyes were precise. There was a condition in the trust that it could only transfer to you directly, not to a husband, not to a father. Your grandmother was a very particular woman. A pause. The trust matures when you turn 28, or upon legal separation from a husband, whichever comes first. Meredith was 27. She sat with that information for a long moment. 36 acres. She had never owned anything. Her clothes, her books, her careful $14. She had never in her life held a deed with her name on it. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since your wedding day," Polly said without flinching. "I thought your mother had told you, and then I thought it was better for you to know about it when you needed it." There were things Meredith might have said to that. She let them go. What's the land like? Polly smiled slowly. There's a farmhouse on it, small, needs work, and a creek that runs along the east side. She wrapped both hands around her own cup. I think you'd find it manageable. The business of legal separation was not simple. Meredith had always known this, the way women of her generation knew certain things, not from being told directly, but from the accumulated evidence of watching what happened to women who tried. In 1831, in the state of Virginia, a wife had no property, no standing, and no reliable recourse. What she had, if she was careful, was procedure. What Meredith had, more specifically, was Polly's neighbor. His name was Mr. Aldous Brent, and he was a lawyer who had been practicing in Harwick for 30 years, and who had drawn up the original terms of Meredith's grandmother's trust. He was small and precise, and wore the same gray coat every time Meredith saw him, and he explained the situation to her across his desk, with the careful, unembellished clarity of a man who has had to tell many women things they should have been told sooner. You cannot divorce him, he said. Not without grounds that the court will accept. And he said unkind things in company is not grounds. But the trust is sound. The land is yours upon your 28th birthday, regardless of the state of the marriage. Your continued residence apart from your husband strengthens your claim to separate maintenance. He paused. You are not free, Mrs. Ashby. But you are not trapped in the way you may have believed. What does that mean, practically? It means you can live on your land, you can work it, you can earn from it. He has no legal claim to what is designated yours in the trust. Another pause. He will likely not come for you. Men of his position rarely do. The scandal of chasing a wife is worse, in their calculation, than the scandal of losing one. Meredith thought about that on the walk home, the scandal of losing one, as though she were a glove, gone missing. She thought about it, and then she stopped thinking about it, because there was a farmhouse that needed assessing, and a creek to walk, and 36 acres to understand. And she had always been better at work than at bitterness. The farmhouse was called, by no one in particular, and by some habit of the county, the Drummond place. Her grandmother's name, before she married. It was a small house, white once, gray now, sitting in a field that had gone to wildgrass and goldenrod at the end of the season. The porch boards needed replacing. The east window was cracked. The pump in the yard was stiff but functional. Meredith walked through it on a Tuesday morning with the key Polly had kept for 11 years in her kitchen drawer. She went from room to room, 4 rooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, 2 small bedrooms. The ceilings were low and the light was good. There was a fireplace in the kitchen that someone, at some point, had loved. The mantelpiece was beautifully made, carved with a simple running vine, the work of someone who had cared. She stood in the kitchen for a long time. She had $14.30 and 36 acres, and a house that needed a new porch, and a cracked window and a fireplace that someone had once loved. She was 27 years old, and she had spent 4 years being a Spaniel. She rolled up her sleeves. She did not do it alone. She wants to be clear about that, looking back. The particular myth that a woman rebuilds herself in solitude, through sheer private will, is a myth that has never served women well. What she had was the opposite, a web of people, most of them women, who understood what it meant to need something and to ask. Polly came 3 days a week. She brought food and opinion, and her own considerable knowledge of how to run a kitchen garden and keep a house standing through a Virginia winter. She brought her friend Mrs. Calder, who knew carpentry the way some women know needlework, as a thing learned from necessity, then loved. Mrs. Calder spent 2 weekends on the porch boards without being asked twice, and did not accept payment, only supper and the opportunity to talk. The crack in the east window was repaired by a glazier's apprentice named Toby, 17, who was learning his trade and grateful for the practice. Meredith paid him in apple cake, the same recipe she had made for Dorian's colleagues on that October Saturday. And it struck her, measuring out the flour, that the same hands that had served those men could now serve entirely different purposes. By December, the house was warm, not beautiful, not yet, but honest. She could feel the difference. The way you feel the difference between a coat you have borrowed and one that is fitted to your own shoulders. She had also, by December, acquired 2 things she had not expected. The first was a cow, purchased for $6 from a farmer on the next road over who was selling off stock before a move north. The cow's name was, allegedly, Buttercup, a name so impractical and sentimental that Meredith kept it purely out of the recognition that some impracticalities deserve to survive. The second was a reputation. Word had moved through the county in the way that word always moves. Not through direct telling, but through the accumulation of small observations. The woman at the Drummond place. Doing it herself. Bought the Macready cow. Has a garden going already, this late in the season. Polly's niece. Separated from Ashby, the physician. Keeping her name. She was Mrs. Holloway now. Her own name, her mother's name, the name on no document of Dorian's composition. People came to her carefully, at first, then less carefully. A woman named Suzanne, whose situation Meredith recognized immediately, and about which she asked nothing directly and everything indirectly, over the course of 3 conversations, began coming to the Drummond place, on Thursday afternoons. They drank tea and talked, and after the 3rd Thursday, Suzanne said, "I don't know how you did it. I keep thinking about doing it and I can't see the next step." "The next step," Meredith said, "is a different size for everyone. What's yours?" They worked it out at the kitchen table, the same table where Polly had told her about the land, and the same lamp, and the October light gone now to December gray. Meredith did not have a solution to offer. She had no particular wisdom. What she had was the specific, practical knowledge of someone who had recently had to figure out where to put a foot when the floor you were standing on turned out to be only a painting of a floor. She shared that. It was all she had to share. There were others, after Suzanne. Not many. This is not that kind of story, and 1831 is not that kind of year. But some. Women who came to sit in the kitchen on various afternoons, not for rescue, not for revolution, but for the simpler and more necessary thing. To be in a room where their situation was not treated as a problem they had caused themselves. Dorian did not come for her. Mr. Brent had been right about that. Dorian was a man of position, and men of position, in Meredith's experience, were above all else men of calculation. The calculation in this case was unambiguous. Pursuing her would invite scrutiny, and scrutiny would require him to account for the kind of husband he had been, and he was not interested in that accounting. He sent one letter, in November, through a solicitor. A letter that was less a personal communication than a legal document with salutation, establishing that he did not contest her occupancy of the Drummond land, that the trust terms were acknowledged, and that he expected no further communication. She read it twice. She kept it in the desk drawer, behind the household accounts. She did not write back. She turned 28 in February. The land transferred to her name on the 15th of that month, a Thursday, in Mr. Brent's office, with Polly as witness. The deed was a single page of legal paper, with a border of fine print and her name in the center of it, written in Mr. Brent's careful hand. Meredith Holloway, sole proprietor, 36 acres including the farmhouse and creek parcel, known as the Drummond place. She held the deed for a long moment. Mr. Brent and Polly were both watching her, with the particular gentleness of people who understand that some things take a moment to believe. "Thank you," she said to Mr. Brent. And then to Polly, something she had not yet managed to say. "You should have told me sooner." "Yes," Polly agreed. "I should have. I would have been less afraid." "Yes," Polly said again, and then quietly, "but you still would have had to leave on your own." Meredith thought about that on the drive home. The cold air, the bare February fields, the road that led to her house, her road, her 36 acres going dormant under frost and waiting for spring with the patience of things that have always been there, whether or not anyone was paying attention. She thought about the woman she had been at 23, standing at a kitchen window watching frost form on the glass. That woman had believed, without knowing she believed it, that the glass was fixed. That she was on the cold side of it permanently, watching warmth she could not enter. She knew now that the window opens, that you have to be the one to open it, that this is both the hardest thing and the only thing. She turned up the collar of her coat. Spring would come. She had work to do before it did. She knew what the first day of planting looked like now. She had walked her fields enough times in enough weather to know them the way you know a thing you have chosen rather than inherited. She knew where the soil was deep and where it thinned. She knew the creek flooded slightly in March and pulled back by April and left the east field rich and black and ready. She knew that Suzanne would come on Thursday and that she would put the kettle on before she arrived, because Suzanne always came cold and never said so. She knew that Mrs. Calder had found a woman in town who needed the same kind of Thursday afternoon, and that she had sent her to Meredith, and that Meredith had said yes, without thinking about whether she had time or resources, because some yeses don't require thinking. She knew that the vine carved into the kitchen mantelpiece, that careful, loving vine, had been carved by her grandmother's hands. Polly had told her that in December, quietly, as though it were almost too private to say. Her grandmother had lived in this house for 11 years after her husband died, and had, by all accounts, been happier in those 11 years than in any years before them. Meredith ran her fingers along the carved vine sometimes, in the evenings, the way you touch something to remind yourself it is real. It was always real. At the top of the page, in the account book she kept for the farm, expenses, receipts, the slow accumulation of a life built on actual ground, she wrote the date, February 15, 1832. And below it, in the careful hand she had used for 4 years on Dorian's household accounts, she wrote the number that now stood for what she owned. 36 acres. She closed the book. She put more wood on the fire. Outside, the fields were still and white and waiting. Inside, the kitchen was warm.